So now in this end panel, I've got four esteemed industry thought leaders, I would say.
Well, the
here.
fifth one's sitting out there hiding, trying to crawfish.
So these people, these gentlemen and a lady will talk about the existing project controls maturity, the path forward, and what's the end state vision they think should be, and share their views on it. And at the end of individual talks, Vikrant will sum it up and conclude the conference.
Yeah,
so
I'll
Loretta, pass on the mic to Peter, or the lady should take the lead.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you can start. You got a label anyway. Thank you.
Well, that was quite quietly cruel, but thank you. So certainly in terms of project controls maturity, I think everybody here today has heard from some amazing experts in Australian industry around what constitutes maturity in different aspects of project controls, which has been fantastic. But I would say from our experience and what we see across different organisations, across different industries, is that project maturity is often an individual discipline, and we still see in a number of different organisations where project manager or program manager is king. And so as we see organisations moving down a path of greater project maturity, it's when you can start to bring it away from being an individual discipline and really start to build that project culture around successful projects, consistently successful projects, and within that framework, start to really inject some innovation and agility for organisational change as well. So I think what we're all seeing across the different projects that we're involved in is that our organisations are changing more and more rapidly, and the quantum of change is more significant now than it's ever been previously. So the ability for an organisation to adapt, to innovate, and to still consistently deliver projects is where I really see that maturity curve taking us. Over to you guys.
All right. So I guess my view on this, looking forward at how the industry is going to mature, I think the way that projects are being delivered is changing quite quickly, and the types of projects that we're delivering is also changing. I've recently been involved with some large technology projects, and the planners were using P6 on the, to measure the progress, and they were measuring chunks of work in sprints. But what they were actually only measuring was time. They weren't actually measuring scope. So I think a smart or a project controls professional going forward will be adaptable not only in the type of industry that they're working in, but the type of work that they're doing too. So to me, as individuals, I think we need to upskill, understand more, potentially broaden our horizons. And then obviously, as I spoke about in my speech today, I think the power of technology in very narrow areas, especially when it comes to AI, is going to have a massive impact. So there may be no use for you to go onto site and physically measure progress anymore because a drone can do that. But then how do you adapt your knowledge to making it valuable to your client? So how do you use that information to make it valuable? So I guess my message is similar to Loretta's in that sense that it's consistent. You need to be adaptable, you need to be able to change, and you need to be seen as a point of trust that won't change. That's the one thing that we've always had, is that we're seen as the people that will tell the truth. So I guess that's my summary of us going forward.
Oh, it's hard to summarize. I don't know. I'm going to hit you on a little one different, expanding on really the overall international market and issues. Our geopolitical situations around the world is that the technology is moving in one direction, the support's moving in the opposite direction. What we're seeing, I've been working on projects from everywhere but the US. I have a bad accent, worst passport, don't like to work there. But when looking at Nigeria, Russia, Europe, Middle East, where I've been working one of the things we're seeing is everybody's going, I've got the latest software, I've got the latest tool. Every one of the groups in there are great softwares and great powers, but the issue that we're having is that it was a good discussion at the ISEC PAX conference by Genevieve, who discussed how, the problem about AI is that the software's moving in one direction, the people aren't trained. Australia's going to be one of the first ones, and she used to teach at Stanford. At the university she's at, they're having their first ICT class to bring people in to start embracing the fact that the technology's gone so far beyond. We see that. I've been doing forensic audits for the past few months in Nigeria. Well, we have Primavera. Well, they have schedules. They're just basically logical bars driven out by constraints, not measuring performance, not analyzing against it. We have EVM. They have a budget and they're measuring the actuals, but again, not measuring the performance. That's not one project, that's a trend. It is repetitively around. CII, Construction Industry Institute, has been really pushing lately, the new PDRI and getting international data in. And what they're seeing is, in all seriousness aside, that people are taking old estimates, doubling them and throw 25% on, and they're probably accurate. But they're not, but in the reality, they're still using the old estimates and the old items. The data is not getting back to the people. Quantity surveyors turn their information in and it gets paid, but it doesn't get back into the historical databases. And we're seeing that across, I've had people from China, Vietnam, Qatar, Middle East, all saying the same thing. We are experiencing an issue of training and mentoring is gone, but the AI keeps going forward. And that's probably the biggest thing we, as experts, need to look at, is how do we get them back coming together instead of in polar opposite directions.
Yeah. I'm going to take a slightly different, slightly different point of view in that, we've all heard about the current state of maturity of the project controls function or project controls as a discipline. Perhaps thinking about it from the perspective of a pan-industry view, we are all familiar with the standards and guidelines that are available, whether it is PMBOK, MSP, Prince2. I'd like to really see the industry take a more holistic view and move towards a standard that helps provide a more definitive guidance on how project controls needs to be implemented on big projects. So, I can give an example for those who are familiar with or who work in asset management. In 2014, ISO 55000 was released as an asset management standard, and that's been instrumental in helping organizations think through asset management from taking a life cycle view. So I would like to see something similar be done for the project controls discipline, or for that matter, more broadly, project management. There is a current standard, ISO 21500. There's a lot of stuff that falls out of PMBOK and Prince2, but really, there needs to be that one single source of truth which serves as a definitive guide, and I think that would make a big difference. In addition to all that my colleagues have said, and for that matter, all the presenters have said today.
I'd like to ask, 21508, the 21000, how many people here have heard of it? Hold your hands up for a second. 1, 2, 3, about 9 people. 21508, I'm the AAC representative to the ISO for that. That is the standard that basically of program management, earned value management. They have now created an international worldwide standard that says this is how you do EVM, this is a work breakdown structure, and we built a vocabulary, and it's for sale. You look at this room right here, there's 9 people. At the PC Expo in London, which I did a week ago, if I can remember where I am, over 110 people in the room, 2 people. That's an ISO standard. It's published.
Yep.
It got 94% approval. That's one of the highest approvals we've ever had on an ISO standard by almost every country represented in this room. 38 main countries and 18 participants. Think about that. 11 people out of about 200 have heard of an ISO standard that changes our profession more than anything else out there. It standardizes us.
Yep. Yep.
And then how many people here are familiar with ICMS? The international. We had 8 people. ICMS, which is basically the bread and butter of RICS and all the associations, which again sets a standard of uniformity. We got 11 people who've heard of it. That's an issue for us. We've got to get those items out there, because if not, we're not going to have a standard.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that, but I also look at the way that we contract and deliver projects in Australia, and our contracts are rarely written to conform to an ISO standard. So it does make delivering or managing our project controls against a purist standard somewhat challenging. And so I think every standard has what it gives us is a set of guidelines and a set of parameters to work within, and I think what it should be providing us is a set of thresholds of acceptability. But I don't believe that any standard can be implemented in its pure form across the breadth and complexity of projects that we're needing to deliver, certainly here in Australia, and I would suspect in some of the international experience we have on the stage here today as well.
Which is funny, because the ISO representatives very strongly on that, bringing that part up. The whole point of the ISO, as you said, was to actually not be strict to say, but to give a recommended practice guideline on a standard, and that was probably the most important aspect of what Australia gave into that argument.
And we do that for design aspects of projects that we all build. So why not extend that to the project management and project controls discipline? Because time and time again we see projects going off track, and EY has done an extensive study on that, and we presented some of our research today. So just a question, I mean, I'm not saying it's a silver bullet solution, but something to think about, whether a more definitive standard would help improve the level of maturity of the industry as a whole.
I've got a question back on that one. So ISO 55000 is quite well known. I'm sure more people in the room have heard of that than the 21, which I don't even know the number, which is exactly what I'm trying to prove here. That leads to my question, which is, why do you think the asset management industry has been incentivized to actually adopt it? Because they're doing it. There must be some there must be some reason that they're doing it. And why does nobody in our industry know about it? Why is the incentive not there? Has it been sold differently? Is it implemented differently? What's the reason?
I mean, I've got a view, and thinking on the fly, I think over the last 10 years, we've seen a significant investment in infrastructure build. So the industry has not really had a chance to take a holistic view and respond to the growth that we've seen by formalizing the discipline of project management and project controls, whereas asset management stems from the fact that there is a lot of aging infrastructure, and organizations and governments need to get more out of existing assets. So there's been that consistent effort that has gone into formalizing asset management as a discipline, as a function, and that has led to ISO 55000 being formalized in about 2014. I just think
the certifications with the asset management, like ISO 9001, there's a certification, everyone was interested. 14,000, same thing. So similarly, with 55,000, but 21,500, no one asking for certifications. The same as ISO 26,000, and it is a social responsibility. No one cares about it.
Well,
But everyone modified the structures and everything to meet the social responsibility, but no one care about the 26,000.
But I think if we go back to what Sean said as well, and if we're looking at establishing a level of organisational capability in the first instance, to start to build a foundation for project controls maturity, I think ISO absolutely forms one of those foundation elements. Awareness of it, awareness of the role that it plays in the projects that we're delivering. But I think there's a lot more to the capability build than just an awareness of ISO. Yeah. And certainly as the industry is changing and as our organisations are changing, and a lot of the deep knowledge of project controls is moving out of the industry and is being replaced, as was said, by technology and tools that sometimes the people know how to use, and sometimes they don't really know the logic and the structure of how to actually make a project work, let alone how to represent it in a tool. Yeah. I think if we go back to some of the basics and are building with the end in mind, and the end being a comprehensive body of knowledge and a community of practice that is gearing towards implementation of those standards, then I think that's a big step forward from where we are today.
I think there's a couple key variables that have also hit. The merger and acquisition mentality. When 35 years ago when I started this, and my beard was nice and dark, and life was good, people mentored each other in programs. The universities and the industry had a very tight relationship. And there were hundreds of companies where, let's look at it, see what Wood just bought, another company, which they bought Amec Foster Wheeler, Jacobs just bought CH2M, AECOM bought 18 different companies. Wait a minute, Jacobs just sold off their oil and gas division last week to Worley Parsons. These companies now, where we used to have stability in departments where people joined Bechtel. I have friends who've been with Bechtel now for 35 years. They've moved around, they've done, but they stayed consistent. And then you've got those of us who, I've been bought and sold more transferred than a professional football player. I was with one company, I came into work the next day, here's your package, we just got bought by IHI of Japan, who just 6 months later sold us to another company. When you start buying like that, then you have to adopt the systems. AECOM at one point was running 18 different project control systems because they had 18 different companies they'd bought in a 2-year period. How do we get consistent? And so I think that's one of the biggest trends that we're seeing now that people are learning.
Apologies, I was just presenting. It was the other end.
Hi, Colin.
Sorry.
No? That's all right. So any views from the room? Would be interested to hear what people have to say. It's not just about us, it's about all of us as professionals. You want to hand the mic?
Thanks. Great that we're having this discussion. It's long overdue. However, I like to look for possible solutions, if nothing else. My experience, which is quite long, is that.
Are we meant to dance?
I thought we got to the karaoke bit, but hello, am I still on? Hello, can you hear me anyway?
Yes.
Probably not. Okay. I've struggled with acceptance across industry of project controls as a profession for many years, and to me, there are differences in the reasons for this depending on the industry you're in. So, for instance, in construction contracting, it's the nature of the fact that they're short-term, often, contracts. So, so they don't want to keep the overhead of or train people because they may not need them if they don't win the next contract. So that's one of them. In IT for many years, I trained IBM many years ago, and in project management. And you know, the resistance was, well, we don't need that. We can manage that as the project manager. So that's another reason. And then in owners' organizations, and I've worked in all of these. So and I've become frustrated with this lack of commitment, if you like, to project controls. And it'd be interesting for other people to say if they feel the same way. Oh, thank you. In owners' organizations, it's a little bit the same as IT often, is that you know, we can handle that. We don't need dedicated project controllers. But I'll also add to that, when they do have dedicated project controllers, they don't listen to them because often we are the messenger. And when we keep saying things that they don't like, that's when they say we don't need a project controls anymore. That's my 2 cents worth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the room?
Basically, when it comes to project controls, everyone is talking about EVM, end value management. So if you ask for another method, they say, why don't you print it and compare by manually? Don't you have any other method? So any other method can be introduced to project controls, like different techniques or different way, like Sean was telling about 6 methods of estimating it. But when it comes to project controls, only single one end value management.
No? Colin?
Well, yeah, I don't think that's very. I am aware that there has been, in my area of risk, some attempt to combine EVM and risk and Monte Carlo earned value. So you get probabilistic earned value, which is quite possible. After all, the schedule and the estimate are only consensus opinions of what's going to happen in the future. And as I was just expressing in my presentation, the truth is we don't know things that exactly as it appears in the schedule and the estimate. And the probability of the project finishing exactly as planned is close to 0. So it makes some sense to take a probabilistic view so that you can answer the question that is most upper mind in owners of projects. When are we going to finish and how much is it going to cost? And that is almost certainly not going to be what's in the estimate and what they approved at the board in time or money. I would like to say that, in case no one else has said it so far, in 2014 I went around to multinational oil and gas companies in Europe and talked to them about methodologies for cost and schedule risk analysis, which they're all required to do to improve projects. And they were they were using a methodology which is rather limited, and their reasons were pretty much universal, and that was that they can't rely on getting good schedules put forward by their own planning teams. So, you know, we're talking about mega projects and large mega projects. As I just said, $200 billion worth US, $280 billion Australian of LNG projects have just been built in Australia, and we can't get good planners. Now, can you work that out? Why can't we? My answer is there is not the training happening that there should be for good project controls people, and owners should be specifying some sort of professional accreditation that has real meaning for what skills people have, because it's not good enough to be good at sitting at a computer and joining up activities. You have to be able to plan and realise what it is you're planning and the implications of it.
I'd also like to I think earned value is just one of the tools that we have. I mean, I think there's a myriad of tools, and we saw some presentations today. There's visual reports, there's different types of graphs. At the end of the day, we're storytellers. We take data, which is just data, and then we convert that into information. And I think if we limit ourselves to one method, we're probably holding ourselves back. I think there's a lot of ways that we can tell a story, and it's whatever story we need to tell to our stakeholder to add value. So I think going forward, that's something that we need to embrace as well, is how can we really send an effective message to the people that need to make the decision.
When one of the big ones, as another one that's coming up a lot, is agile management. So I'm on the agile committee as amongst all the others, because you listen to get the feedback of what people are saying. And agile is being embraced as a way of like EVM light in a more true sense. So there are the options, but it's funny, if you look at most of the traditional Bechtel, Jacobs, Fluor, they are still running the two-dimensional traditional matrix. So there is still quite a lot out there. It's just, I'm a big proponent of EVM because I've put it on commercial and international projects. I've put it on $50,000 to $8.5 billion. It works. It's sound if you have the tools of a resource-loaded schedule, a real schedule, not something where somebody puts as late as possible constraints and shoves it all out to the end. It needs to be real and credible. And education, a lot of people came up. That's what we were talking about at the Project Control Institute. We talked about in ISIC last week's meetings and like that. Training is fundamental. If we don't train them and we don't mentor them, then as you said, we have a lot of people like us sitting here wondering about it. But there are plenty of options out there. It's just being consistent.
Yeah. So the topic of training is quite interesting, and we've got a mic here. Yeah, I think it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for the next question, there's somebody.
Yeah. So the topic of training, or as we call it at EY, learning and development, is quite pertinent. And I think from what we have seen, the industry as a whole could do a lot more in terms of formalizing the way it trains project management professionals, and more specifically project controls. And I think having a standardized approach, or at least an approach that provides clear guidelines on what constitutes a good project controls professional training would be really useful. That's my view, and wanted to invite some views on that. I mean, Laurie and I were just talking about it a short while ago. That's certainly something which we face at EY, and still trying to get our heads around how we go about solving it. I can see some hands there.
One's got the microphone there.
Been hearing about, we need more training, we need more project controls people and so on. One of the things I see a lot in business type projects is a lot of management don't even see project managers as being an added value activity. I think in a lot of industries, project controls is not necessarily seen as added value. And any sort of solution is always made up of people, process and tools. Any one missing, you compromise your factors and so on. So my question is, how do we sell project controls as an added value activity to senior management so that they themselves push for what we need to move forward?
Well, that's a valid question, because as I said, I've been on projects that when they realize their budget's over, who's the first people they cut on the project? They cut the project controls team down to bare minimum. The only way I've ever been successful in doing it, to be honest, let them crater and then rebuild them. Because until they burn, they're ignorant. They'll ignore. So let them burn. That's been it's been the only one that's effectively worked.
Well, it's a realistic answer. Here?
Further to this, the Chartered Institute of Building in the UK did some surveys, particularly about time management, but this is relevant to this discussion. Thanks. The Chartered Institute of Building in the UK did a survey to basically back up what they knew anecdotally was true. In fact, what we know is anecdotally true. And but they said, well, we're not just going to do a survey and prove what we know is true. We're going to make some suggestions for solutions. And so what they did was they said, we're now going to develop, in this case it was for planners and schedulers, but we're now going to develop a course for training them. And it's, to me, when people say a good project controls person, they mean a competent project controls person, I think. And in Australia, we actually have a set of national competency standards for a whole range of things, including project management, for instance. So you can do a certificate and a diploma, and they follow the competency standards. And those competency standards are quite clear. In order to be competent in this and to get a qualification, you need to prove it. You need to prove your competency. This is a suggestion I'm making, that somehow amongst us all, we push for the development of competency standards and then some qualifications, and it might take a while, and then perhaps force industry to only employ people like that.
Yep.
So Anne, I'd actually like to go back to the question here at the front of the room, because I'm pretty sure there is a more optimistic answer than the crash and burn. But I think it's up to every single person in this room, and it's up to us as project professionals to build that community of practice and to build the perceived value first and foremost, because upper management is never going to see that value just by having it told to them. It's something that they need to have made tangible in terms of more delivery of projects according to the framework that has been set. And I think, as Colin said, the schedule at the beginning is but an estimate of what is going to be the end state. But just like we need to manage financials in an organisation, from budget to forecast to actuals, we obviously need to be doing the same in our projects and delivering a closer budget to forecast than forecast to actuals, so that we are narrowing that gap of uncertainty even from early stage estimation. And the better we get at that, I believe the better upper management and middle management is going to understand the value of project controls. But I don't think it's up to a single organisation, because as we're seeing, organisational change is probably one of the biggest challenges we face. People are moving around between different organisations constantly. So it is up to a group of people to build that as an expectation in the community, in our industries, and certainly in our profession, to deliver at that standard and to continue to deliver a narrower gap each time.
I agree with that, and I'd also like to just add that I believe to provide value, I often find that project controls people are sometimes a bit self-serving. They, this is the way I do it, this is the information I'm going to produce, whether or not the project wants it or not, or needs it or not. So I think if we change our mindset a little bit more into how can I actually provide value to this project, rather than just ticking the boxes of compliance, I think you become more integrated within the team, and then they can't really get rid of you, because you're delivering. That's a very optimistic view, but I believe it.
Well, I mean, I think your point was very good. Is that here's your challenge. So we challenge you. I mean, I've spent 35 years fighting for this, but I've just watched in the past year, and Laurie you can talk to Laurie about it. He'll back me up. Most of the major companies have dumped support of certification, dumped support of project controls training, dumped the associations, but they've all basically mandated PMI courses. I've seen entire project controls programs with it thrown out, but the most interesting aspect is the one company I know that is basically taken the reverse approach is Bechtel, the largest privately held company in the world, and Bechtel still pushes that project controls is their number one asset. Oh, isn't it interesting that Bechtel is the most profitable privately owned company in the world? It's an interesting matrix. They have pushed that, but our challenge, as I said, we are all here. We represent the core of the people to get here, but how many people did their companies actually pay for them to come here?
So, wow, lots of hands. Yeah.
So the challenge is
so
if
where I sit, I do an awful lot of scheduled training, and I work with a lot of large companies around Australia. I think there's plenty enough scheduled training going on. The problem is that the companies that are unsuccessful are those who don't put in procedures and processes and implement scheduled training. And I go around to a lot of large companies and I run a course. I say, do you want procedures? No. Do you want templates? No. And they're unsuccessful at scheduling. The companies that are successful, and Bechtel have one of the finest set of project procedures in the world that they measure the success of a project on not whether the project's delivered or not, but whether the project managers follow the procedures. Then the project is guaranteed to be successful. Training's important, skilled people are important, but I know companies where they train people, they come back, there's no procedures, no process for them to follow, and they leave. So you start off with your ISOs, or your standards, whatever you want to take, then you develop processes and work instructions and train people. I never went on a training course as a kid. My company director gave me a set of procedures and said, follow these, if you don't, you're fired. His projects were successful. I think there's too much emphasis on training. I make a lot of money on it. Not enough emphasis on writing procedures that are adequate for the project and making people follow them.
Valid point. If you train somebody to a bad procedure, you're still going to have you have bad training, not a bad procedure. You fix the procedure.
Absolutely,
Yeah. Yep, there were a few other hands. Yes.
Oh, sorry, just to
You
follow
in the third row, yeah?
me.
Sorry, there's someone up the back that's already got the microphone.
Mike, okay. So, Lewis.
Sorry.
Yep,
So
please.
just to follow on the training discussion, training and certification accreditation are great, and one of you said that the companies are actually dumping their project controls expertise, and I agree with that. If I look at myself when I was at a uni working with Bechtel, I was put in a team and we got mentored. So we had the experienced people who would tell us what to do, and this gentleman said follow the procedures, and he's right. And if we didn't do the right thing, we got our asses kicked. And I think that's missing now a lot. I think a lot of companies don't value the mentoring aspect of their new people. They expect people to come in and just work. So if I'm a lead planner, I just got to work, and I don't have any time in my budget to actually train and mentor the young blokes. And I think our young people are actually almost leaderless in our organisation and making do with what they can. So that's what I think.
Yep.
Yep.
You wanted to say?
Like you are talking about training as an expiration date.
There's a mic coming.
And also it is focused on only particular tools and techniques that can be valid for certain period of time, whereas you should focus on education, which can be adaptable to various situations, and even if the technology changes, you will be able to cope up with that. So that's what actually education is what we are trying to promote even in the US. I think you should do it in the same way here also.
I think it's relevant to say, I can borrow that for a moment. we all benefit from medical science. It is built completely on evidence, and they are scrupulous about proving that something is efficacious by double-blind testing. If we were a profession and an industry where we used evidence to make conclusions, we'd get a lot further. But it is disappointing and dispiriting that in the 90s the bean counters disbanded project delivery organisations within large corporations and of course broke them up. It is very hard for young people coming into our industry to become professionally competent because the avenues seem to be missing, and it's perhaps gone into academia, and the problem there is you need practical experience, and as Paul has alluded, you need processes and procedures that have been proven to work. That's why they're there. Effectively, we're standing on the shoulders of other people, and most of the industry's processes and procedures have come out of Bechtel anyway, but most of us have been around for a while also know that although it will cost you plenty to employ Bechtel, they will get your project over the line more reliably on time than most other organisations. So there's evidence-based stuff to draw conclusions from.
It is true that there is a big lack of training and qualification and certification of people in Australia. But there is another issue. I think the elephant in the room, in my experience, is the lack of understanding of the issues in senior management and directors of corporations. And so I asked the panel, how can we try and influence the understanding of the importance of project management and project control in all its elements in the people who make the fundamental decisions? Because what tends to happen is they say when it has to be finished and how much it will cost. And those decisions are made irrelevant or in the absence of a serious study to work out what the figures are. I'd like the comments.
I'm happy to take that one to start with. So I don't believe that any company director in their right mind is going to be making any decision devoid of what they believe is soundly provided information. It's a go to jail card. So I think the flaw is in potentially not asking the right questions, not digging deep enough, and I think, as you say, the lack of understanding or ability to understand all of the different drivers that make or break project success, to then be able to problem solve that down to saying, okay, every organisation has a budget. So whether we like it or hate it, there is a budget. But generally that is driven by a whole bunch of processes that say we're seeking input from our organisation, we're seeking input from professionals who should understand this better than necessarily a company director will. So I think a lot of it comes back to making sure that we're delivering the real information, not the information that we think that management or our board of directors wants to hear. And again, I really strongly believe that that is much more than just the board of directors. That comes down to your entire company culture and having a culture of courage and a culture of wanting the truth, irrespective of whether it's the truth that you want to hear or the truth that you're going to need to remedy. And maybe that's the optimistic answer, but any company director who doesn't take that position of seeking the right amount of information and seeking to have as best information as they can ask for provided to them is directly in conflict of the Companies and the Corporations Act. So certainly in terms of the intent, I don't think is to ever make a decision without the right information at their fingertips. Perhaps they trust too deeply, perhaps they don't know what questions to ask, and that is a process of deeper education at that executive level.
Or perhaps they're in the finance and banking sector.
Absolutely, case in point, absolutely at the moment.
Or in the public service. So I'm not sure how many of you were part of Marion Terrell's presentation this morning from the Grattan Institute. Some very interesting statistics were presented, especially around the public sector and premature announcements and the correlation with project costs. So yeah, please do read up on the slides. It's quite interesting. Yeah.
Hello.
I think there's someone at the back of the room who's got a question as well.
It's just following on from the training you were talking about. So I'm talking really from a construction engineering point of view here. I think it's a little bit unfair saying that project controls are not valued. In my experience, they are. With the training side, to get the real value is not just the project controls training, it's understanding the job. It's having the training of contract, if you need to understand contract. And where the real value comes in is you going to the project manager or project director with a problem, but also with a solution. You tell me any project director where if you went to them and said, I've got a potential extension of time claim here, under clause blah, 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 I think we could have about 20 days. That equates to 10 million. I think you'll soon be valued. And that's what I believe is the key. It's that value, and project controls, I think it's an understanding of what is in project controls, and that we're not just reporters, we add value, and I think if we can get project controls to a point where we become part of the decision-making team rather than just the reporter, you're going to see a huge difference.
I just want to say that I agree with that, and I think going forward, that's really the space we want to move in. I saw they had the Autodesk University last week or so, and they had quite a bit on that bridge in Holland that was 3D printed. And I was looking at this project, and it's an entire bridge that got designed, 3D printed, and then put in place. And I was thinking, well, what is the project controller's value in that project? You know, because we're going to see more of that going forward. And it's not counting the bricks, because there are no bricks, but it's understanding the risks, understanding the decision making, and contributing to the team. So I agree with you completely. I think we need to move away from a reporting mindset and use our skills to really provide value.
Colin was speaking of NASA's improvement in their performance over the last 5 or 6 years. Now, one of the things that underpinned that was the fact that the Office of Government Audit in the States came down very hard on NASA, basically on its project controls processes and the use of them and the implementation. And the difference between the US and here is our National Audit Office can just report and not make recommendations and also instructions and follow through, which they did with NASA in the States. So I believe if we want to improve the value of our profession, in Australia, the largest project funder is Defence, and the National Audit Office made significant criticism of Defence's basically project management and project controls. Then I think that's what we should be pushing for, is to get Defence and government to insist on proper project controls in the same way as the Office of Government Audit in the United States says to NASA, because we've got evidence that it works. If you improve your project controls, then you improve your project performance.
So I think we're getting ready to wrap up, but an interesting dichotomy is also sometimes we're our project controls people are our own worst enemies also. In Russia, on the project I'm on, I actually have an executive who is do it international, learn everything. I want training, I want international procedures, I want international softwares, I want international experts in the team mentoring. And his own people are throwing their cogs in the works because they're afraid of their jobs. We are changing the methodology that they have done for 40 years. And so it causes there are days that literally I really want to jump off a bridge. You know, so it's, you know, that's a very difficult part that we run into. It's not just in Russia. There are other places that our own people are our own worst enemy. We've got to work across the board. Don't say it's all management's fault. Don't say it's all the people's fault. And that's probably the biggest one that we could do as a profession amongst ourselves. We challenged you to challenge your management, but I would also challenge you, challenge the people.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Good. Yeah. So I
So I
see
said it's time to wrap up.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants a beer.
Exactly. Dehydrated people. Should we call it a close? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We have 15 minutes over.
Yeah, 15 minutes actually. We spent extra 15 minutes, over 30 minutes, so actually we are 50% overtime.
Yeah.
So
Jeez.
that's fine. No problem.
That just saves his liquor bill.
Exactly. But that demonstrates the interest and the enthusiasm in the community. So delay is fine on this occasion, but what it demonstrates is there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of enthusiasm, there is a desire to learn, there's a desire to contribute, which is very encouraging. And I think we are heading in the right direction, although there is a lot of effort needs to be taken to professionalize the project controls, bringing all the right standards and application of those standards on the range of projects cross industry. So again, once again, finally, thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate your support. We'll be here again next year around same time. And I look forward to more active participation from all of you. Thanks to everyone, including the end panel members.